What if a father's legacy was written in blood, not love, in a packed Congress? Jasmine Crockett rips open the darkest Trump secret, a blood contract between father and son worth billions. Barron Trump was promised power but chained to $1.2 billion in debt if the dynasty falls. This isn't inheritance, it's bondage. Can a son ever escape a legacy built on betrayal and blood? Stay with us. This is a story worth every second of your time. The United States Congress was overflowing, every seat taken, lights blazing so harshly that nothing could hide, and rows of cameras blinking red as they streamed the hearing live to millions. Reporters jammed shoulder to shoulder, notebooks clutched like weapons, the sound of shutters snapping mixing with the heavy silence. The air was electric tight as a stretched wire. Everyone knowing this was not a normal session, it was the moment a dynasty's darkest secret might be dragged into the open. At the center sat Jasmine Crockett, spine straight, her hand gripping a thick folder whispered to be a time bomb. Her eyes burned with intent, daring anyone to look away. Directly across, Barron Trump tried to hold his composure, face set in cold defiance, but his restless gaze betrayed unease, as though he already sensed the blade above his head. Then the announcer's voice thundered. Today, the truth about a dynasty will be decided before the eyes of the American people. The words cracked the silence like an explosion. The moderator's words were still hanging in the air when Jasmine Crockett leaned forward. She moved slowly, deliberately, as though aware the whole nation was watching her every gesture. Then she placed a thick envelope on the table. The seal on it read, Cayman Islands Confidential. A murmur swept through the chamber. With one sharp motion, she tore the seal, slid the folder open, and held it up high. This, she declared, her voice ringing as the blood hostage contract. Gasps echoed. Inside was not just paper, it was a contract with Donald Trump's signature at the bottom. Next to it was something more disturbing, Barron Trump's fingerprint pressed in dried blood. Reporters jumped from their seats, cameras zooming in the red light beams, focusing on the shocking evidence. Jasmine didn't flinch. This is not rumor, not speculation. This is signed, sealed, and witnessed. Across the table, Barron froze, his eyes darting, his lips tightening as the reality of the moment crushed him. Jasmine read aloud the terms in a voice that sliced the silence. Condition 1, Barron Trump shall receive $500 million wired directly into his personal account. He shall also be guaranteed an Ivy League scholarship, a seat in the political network, and unrestricted access to the Trump family's shadow fund. She paused and let the words sink in. Every eye in the chamber fixed on Barron, who sat rigid, his jaw clenched. The lure was undeniable, a golden ticket into the world's elite, spelled out in black ink and blood. Her tone hardened, but the price, she continued, is darker. She flipped to the next page, her finger tracing the line. If Barron Trump refuses, or if he betrays his father's command, Donald Trump reserves the right to freeze every account connected to him. Furthermore, all family liabilities will be transferred to Barron, totaling $1.2 billion. A thunderclap of noise followed, gasps, cries, some lawmakers throwing up their hands in disbelief. It was not inheritance. It was a chain. To erase any doubt, Jasmine motioned to the aides. A giant screen lit up behind her, showing a scanned invoice from a Cayman Islands bank. The numbers glowed like a curse. One entry showed $500,000, pending transfer. Another line below read, $1,200,000, contingent debt assignment. Her voice cut through the uproar. This account already exists. If Barron signs, the fortune flows. If he resists, the debt attaches to his name. The chamber exploded in chaos. Senators leaned back hard in their chairs, some covering their faces. Reporters shouted over one another, their microphones trembling. The audience gallery roared as people stood pointing, whispering, some screaming. At the center of it all sat Barron Trump. His face was pale, his hands gripping the edge of the table so tightly the knuckles turned white. Sweat poured down his forehead, dripping onto the polished wood. He did not speak. He could not. The camera zoomed in on him, capturing the moment in merciless clarity. A boy who should have been heir to a fortune now looked like a prisoner awaiting his sentence. Jasmine's folder lay open, the evidence undeniable, the words echoing across America. The crowd felt it. This was no contract of inheritance. It was a hostage note signed in blood. and the storm was only beginning. The tension from the documents still hung in the air when Jasmine raised her hand for silence. She pressed a button on the console, and a hidden speaker crackled to life. Suddenly, Donald Trump's unmistakable voice filled the chamber deep and cold. "If I lose, he will carry it. Barron was born to be my shield." The words seemed to stab through the room. For a split second, no one moved. The silence was so absolute that even the whir of the cameras seemed deafening. Then it shattered. Reporters shouted, senators turned in their chairs, and the gallery erupted in disbelief. Phones lit up like wildfire as journalists tweeted the quote in real time. Screens across the nation flashed the words, "A father calling his son a shield." Millions watching at home froze, some with hands over their mouths. It was not just politics now, it was family betrayal and sacrifice caught on tape. The eruption inside the chamber matched the uproar exploding online. At the center of it all, Barron Trump pushed back his chair and shot to his feet. His face had drained of color, his fists clenched at his sides. "That is not true," he shouted, his voice cracking but loud enough to echo off the marble walls. "I did not sign anything to be a hostage." His words rang with desperation, a denial aimed at millions of eyes through the cameras. But the more he shouted, the more the doubt spread. Was this anger or fear? Jasmine did not flinch. She calmly picked up the folder, still lying open in front of her. With deliberate precision, she flipped to the final page and held it high for all to see. Her finger jabbed at a single line, bold and undeniable. "In case of failure, heir shall absorb liability of 1.2b. The text glared back at everyone like a scar carved into paper. The gasps grew louder. It was written black and white, signed in ink and blood. Chaos took over. Lawmakers rose from their seats, some shouting, others pounding the table. Reporters rushed forward, microphones extended like spears. From the gallery, voices screamed, curses mixed with disbelief. The noise swelled until it threatened to break the walls themselves. Uniformed officers of the Judicial Security Force rushed in, forming a line to restore control. Their stern commands boomed over the chaos, order, order in the chamber. But it was useless. America had already heard the truth, and the hearing was spiraling into chaos. The chamber was still rattling from the recording when Barron burst out of his chair, breath sharp, face flushed. "No, this is a setup. I am not a hostage," he shouted, stabbing a finger toward the speakers, as if he could silence the voice that branded him a shield. Reporters leaned in pens, scratching lenses, widening, hungry for any crack in the story. The dais remained stone still. The air vents hummed like a drum roll, and even the flags seemed to hold their breath. Barron shook his head again and again, as if repetition could rewrite the tape, as if volume could wash away the words. A court officer took a half step forward and stopped, waiting for the storm to either pass or break. Jasmine rose slowly, binder in hand, her voice slicing through the uproar. "I don't need to argue, I will show you." She flipped the tabs with steady fingers, pulled out a stack of color printouts, and raised them high for the cameras. The screens behind her lit up as she spoke. "These are the direct messages between Donald Trump and his personal lawyer, Alan Garten. Look closely, timestamps, routing bars, metadata, all verified under warrant." She stabbed her finger at the third image, her voice rising. "Here, read this. Prepare for Barron a contract in Latin. He will not understand it, but he must sign." Those are Donald Trump's words. That is his instruction. The chamber erupted as the line glared from the screen like a knife. Shock sharpened into comprehension. People read the dates years ago when Barron was still a teenager. Staffers covered their mouths. A senator pinched the bridge of his nose. A reporter whispered, "He never even had a chance." Cameras zoomed until the pixels trembled, the screenshots filling the room like a confession carved in stone. Barron slammed his palm on the table, making the microphones jump, but the images did not flinch. He had no counterproof to offer, only rage that had nowhere to land, and it curdled into a silence heavier than any scream. Whispers spread across the dais like a current. A blood contract written in a language the son could not understand. "This is coercion, not consent," one lawmaker muttered, and another nodded hard. Barron stared at the screen, jaw locked, then dropped his gaze to his own trembling hands. He wanted to fight his father, but obedience chained him. He wanted to deny the trap, but the words blazed in black and white. The chamber inhaled as one realizing the boy had been cornered into signing what he could not read, and the price had been hidden all along. A bailiff raised his arm for calm as the uproar swelled again, and for one breathless moment, the chamber teetered between fury and pity, the screen still burning with that one damning command sign, "What you cannot understand." The uproar had not yet settled when the screens behind Jasmine flickered again. This time the feed connected to a video call. The image sharpened into the face of a silver-haired man in a dark suit, his expression grave, his posture straight, as if the weight of the truth had kept him awake for years. A hush fell over the chamber. Jasmine's voice cut through. "We will now hear from a former banking executive with first-hand knowledge. Please state your name." The man adjusted his glasses, leaned forward, and spoke clearly. "My name is Richard Halden. I am the former managing director of Crestfall Bank in the Cayman Islands." His words echoed across the room, carried by the live feed. "I swear under oath I witnessed the signing of the blood hostage contract. Donald Trump ordered his son, still just a boy, to place a drop of his own blood on the final page. I was present in the room. I watched it happen." Gasps filled the air, and the gallery erupted in shocked whispers. Holden raised a document to the camera, the Crestfall Bank logo stamped across the top. "This is the certified record of the account. $500 million remains suspended, what we called a pending transfer. That money has not yet been released. It sits waiting and will only move if Barron Trump gives his signature again." He paused, the weight of the revelation heavy in his eyes. This was not inheritance. It was collateral. The child himself was collateral. Reporters bolted upright, shouting questions, their voices clashing against each other. The screen zoomed closer to the paperwork, showing account numbers, dates, and the words "pending transfer." Barron Trump. Senators leaned forward, their mouths set in grim disbelief. One lawmaker whispered hoarsely, "$500 million to bait him, $1.2 billion to bury him." The statement spread like fire, repeated in murmurs and gasps throughout the chamber. Halden shook his head slowly, voice breaking. "I should have spoken sooner, but I could not stay silent any longer, knowing a son had been bound to his father's debt with his own blood." Phones buzzed, notifications poured in, and headlines blared across social media within seconds. Barron Trump made a financial hostage. Blood on paper, Cayman banker confirms the contract. The weight of the revelation rippled out beyond the walls of Congress, the world watching in disbelief as a banker admitted he had seen the blood on the page. The chamber itself was chaos, voices clashing, hands pounding on desks. Jasmine stood firm in the storm, her eyes locked on Barron, then back on the camera. Her voice was sharp, almost icy. "This is not an inheritance agreement," she said, each word dropping like a hammer. "This is a contract of sale. This is the sale of a son." The chamber convulsed again, and the world knew it had just heard words that could never be taken back. The fury from the Cayman banker's testimony still rattled the walls when Barron suddenly lurched to his feet. His hands trembled, but his voice cracked like a whip. "You think I'm just a victim? No, I have power of my own," he shouted, lifting a thin packet of papers high above his head. Gasps swept through the gallery as the giant screens behind him blinked alive. The feed zoomed in on the document. He waved Annex No. 14, a secret addendum to the blood hostage contract, one no one had seen until now. The words projected across the chamber like a flare in the dark. Senators leaned forward, eyes narrowing. Reporters shouted into phones, their voices breaking with disbelief. The clause was clear: if Barron ensured his father's victory in the next election, he would be declared the sole political heir inheritor of all networks' assets and billions from the shadow funds. Murmurs spread like wildfire. This was no longer only a financial deal, it was a coronation plan, a blueprint for Trump 2.0. Barron stood rigid, chest heaving, as if daring the world to see him as more than a pawn. The silence that followed was suffocating. Then Jasmine leaned toward her microphone, her voice calm but sharp as steel. "Do you dare, Barron?" she asked, every syllable deliberate, to read the final line. The part labeled, "In case of failure." Her words landed like a trap, snapping shut. Barron's face drained of color. His hands shook as he clutched the addendum tighter, unwilling yet unable to turn away from the truth now hanging in the air. Jasmine's eyes didn't leave him. She raised her hand and the projector flipped to the last clause, blazing in red across the screen. Her voice carried it out in full cutting through the chamber like a blade. If the campaign fails, the entirety of the shadow fund shall be liquidated. All liabilities totaling $1.2 billion shall transfer directly to the heir. The words hung scorching in their simplicity. The gallery gasped as if struck. Barron staggered back a step, still holding the paper, but now his arms sagged under its weight. He had brought the document forward to claim power, but in doing so, he had revealed the chains. His hand trembled so violently the page fluttered in the air. Reporters scrambled headlines already screaming across screens. Prince or hostage Barron exposes. Secret annex trading throne for shackles. Senators shouted over one another, some rising to their feet, others pounding the table. The gallery roared in disbelief, voices blending into a wall of fury. Barron stood frozen, eyes wide, realizing he had just delivered the blade that cut him deepest. The room was no longer just shocked, it was inflamed. And Jasmine, calm amid the chaos, had forced the secret heir to show his own chains. The uproar had barely calmed when Jasmine raised her hand for silence. She opened a folder marked in bold and slipped a cable into the console. The big screens came alive with emails, the header lines stamped Deutsche Bank Confidential. The subject lines were stacked one after another, dates crisp and recent. Jasmine's voice cut through the rising noise. Look at this. These are internal emails seized under subpoena. The subject is clear: auto activation. They show that the contract is not only signed, it is programmed. Her tone was sharp, unyielding. She let the cursor hover over a bold paragraph. Read this carefully. If Donald Trump fails in the upcoming lawsuit, the system will automatically attach $1.2 billion of liability to Barron Trump within 72 hours. The chamber froze, then gasped as if struck. Barron clutched the edge of the table, his face pale. Jasmine's voice kept pressing forward. No appeal, no second signature, no delay. Once the trigger is pulled, this happens automatically. It runs through clearing banks and custodians, and no one in this family can stop it. Staffers bent over laptops tracing routing codes. The metadata matched. There was no escape hatch hidden between the lines. Then the lights dimmed. The LED panel blazed in red, larger than life. Words stamped across the chamber like a brand: 72 hours, 0 minutes, 0 seconds. For a breathless second, the room fell dead silent. The tick came next, sharp and mechanical, and the display shifted. 71 hours, 59 minutes, 59 seconds. The countdown had begun. Every second was visible, audible, merciless. Reporters rose to their feet, shouting into phones, their voices drowned by the pounding in the chamber. Senators leaned back, some covering their faces, others muttering in disbelief. "It's a bomb," one whispered. "A bomb on a timer." The gallery erupted, people pointing at the clock, voices trembling as if they could hear their own futures slipping away with each second. At the center of it all sat Barron Trump. His body sagged into the chair as though the weight of the red digits had pinned him there. His lips moved once before sound came. Then the microphones caught it raw and broken. "I am no longer a son. I am a hostage." The words ricocheted off the marble walls, spilled into cameras, and spread across the nation in real time. Outside the chamber, phones lit up instantly. CNN broke into programming special report. Fox cut its feed mid-sentence. MSNBC switched screens without warning. Across all three networks, the same words burned on the lower third. 72 hours, 0 minutes, 0 seconds, activation pending. The gavel slammed for order, but the echo was drowned out. The nation had seen the trigger, heard the clock, and understood the trap was no longer hidden. It was counting down. The countdown was still ticking when the gavel finally slammed down, but the storm was already out of control. Within hours of the hearing, Congress announced an emergency investigation, bypassing the usual delays. Committees were summoned in the middle of the night, and subpoenas went out before dawn. The Justice Department confirmed that federal prosecutors were entering the case, their focus locked on allegations of financial abuse and unlawful coercion of a minor. The charge sheet read like a nightmare: a father forcing his underage son to sign a blood contract worth billions. The entire Capitol seemed to hold its breath as the machinery of the state began to grind into motion. Donald Trump's legal team scrambled to respond, but the accusations cut deeper than politics. This was not about tax returns or campaign spending. This was about blood and family coercion written in Latin and the spectacle of a son collapsing under $1 billion weight. This is financial abuse at its most grotesque. One federal attorney told reporters holding up the contract's Latin text. The victim was a minor at the time. The law recognizes no consent in such a case. Cable networks played the quote on repeat, the words hammering into the national consciousness. Trump's allies tried to frame it as theater, but the narrative was already spiraling beyond their control. Banks reacted faster than politicians. By the second day, 3 international institutions announced they were suspending operations linked to Trump accounts. Deutsche Bank, whose emails had triggered the countdown revelation, went further. It froze pending transactions, citing reputational damage. Swiss custodians followed suit, stating, "We cannot be party to an agreement that treats a child as collateral." Markets rippled and the Trump organization's credit lines shrank overnight. Stock tickers glowed red as reporters shouted outside bank headquarters. The message was clear: money was fleeing faster than lawyers could speak. What followed was political collapse. Donald Trump's reputation had survived scandals before, but this one cut through the armor. Allies who once defended him on television now paused, their voices faltering. A senator who had stood by him for years muttered off camera, "There's no defending this. This is a father selling his son." Within a week, even foreign leaders who had courted his favor began to condemn the revelations. A European prime minister declared a man who enslaves his own child cannot be trusted with the freedom of others. The statement was replayed in Washington, a dagger from abroad. Across America, the debate turned raw and personal. Families argued at dinner tables. Classrooms buzzed, churches held vigils. Can a father really do that to his son? Callers asked into late-night radio shows, their voices shaking with disbelief. Some defended Donald as misunderstood, but most recoiled in anger or sorrow. Town halls filled with parents speaking through tears. "My son is 16. I cannot imagine chaining him to my debts." The question hung everywhere, heavy and unavoidable. Was bloodline power worth more than bloodline love? The media seized the moment with merciless energy. Headlines screamed across front pages, "The Hostage Prince," "Blood Contract Exposed." The image of Barron Trump slumping in his chair, sweat streaking down his face, his voice cracking as he shouted, "I am a hostage," became the picture of the decade. Clips were replayed in endless loops, his hands shaking the timer, ticking, Jasmine's calm voice reading the terms. Around the globe, the label stuck, "The Hostage Prince." International outlets from London to Tokyo ran the same footage describing a dynasty devouring itself. The cultural backlash grew louder with every replay. Protesters filled streets outside courthouses with signs that read, "Children are not collateral and end inheritance abuse." Activists organized under a new banner, the Coalition Against Financial Exploitation of Minors. Social workers testified before Congress, warning of wealthy families who tied children to crushing obligations. One activist thundered, "If this can happen in the most powerful family in America, it can happen anywhere." The hearings drama had spilled out of marble halls and into living rooms, strollers and schoolyards. Lawmakers moved with rare speed. Draft bills appeared within days proposing federal bans on coercive inheritance contracts. The proposed Barron Act would criminalize financial arrangements that force minors to assume debts or obligations. A congresswoman declared on the House floor, "We are not here to debate partisanship. We are here to ensure no child, rich or poor, ever becomes collateral." The chamber erupted in applause, an unusual unity forged from outrage. Analysts noted that the image of Barron's tears had done more to unite Congress than years of speeches. Meanwhile, the Trump empire buckled. Properties faced foreclosure, creditors demanded repayment, and lawsuits stacked higher each day. News anchors described it as the financial Berlin Wall collapsing in real time. Former associates rushed to distance themselves, leaking more documents in self-preservation. Donald Trump himself appeared on camera defiant, calling the case a witch hunt. But even as he spoke, screens split to show the countdown clock still ticking in bold red, reminding viewers that time was running out. His words sounded smaller against the relentless rhythm of the timer. Amid the collapse, ordinary families found themselves staring into a mirror. In kitchens and cafes, parents told their children, "You are worth more than money." In union halls, workers said a paycheck cannot buy loyalty, it must be earned. A father in Ohio told a reporter, "We've all worried about debt, but this shows us that nothing is worse than sacrificing your child to pay it." The moral struck deep: wealth without love was a curse, not a gift. Even in households far removed from politics, the story rang like a warning bell. By the third week, the narrative had crystallized. Donald Trump was no longer just a politician or businessman. He was the father who turned his son into collateral. Barron was no longer just a teenager in the public eye. He was the hostage prince, a symbol of what happens when ambition devours family. Jasmine Crockett's folder, once called a rumor, was now a national relic, her calm voice replayed in classrooms and churches alike. And America, rattled to its core, understood one truth that could not be unseen. Inheritance should pass down love, not chains. The uproar had reached its peak, the countdown clock still glowing red in the corner of the chamber, when Jasmine Crockett rose to deliver her final words. The gavel pounded again and again, but the roar of voices refused to die down. Then Jasmine's voice cut through the chaos, calm yet commanding, carrying the weight of the entire nation on its back. She turned toward the cameras, toward the millions watching at home, and spoke a sentence that would echo across history. "A dynasty may be wealthy," she declared, her tone unshakable, "but if it is built on blood and debt, then its legacy is nothing more than chains." The words fell like a verdict. Silence swept the chamber. Even the ticking of the countdown seemed to hold its breath. The cameras zoomed in on her face, the lines of determination etched into every feature. For a moment, the drama of contracts and countdowns gave way to something greater, the raw truth of her statement. Reporters froze in their seats, pens dangling in midair. Senators who had shouted themselves hoarse leaned back, staring at her as if they were hearing something ancient and undeniable. Across the gallery, spectators clutched their chests, some in tears. The phrase was already being transcribed, tweeted, and broadcast, destined to be replayed in every home, every bar, every office across the country. Her statement crystallized the message that had hung over the hearing like a storm cloud. Money, no matter how vast, could never replace the bond between a father and child. Power, no matter how intoxicating, could never justify turning a son into collateral. "Money cannot replace a son," one commentator whispered on live broadcast, his voice breaking. "Power cannot justify chains." The chamber trembled, not from shouting now, but from the heavy quiet of recognition. The truth had been spoken, and it left no room for denial. Jasmine pressed on, her voice steady as she drove the point home. "A fair society cannot and will not accept children as financial hostages to power. That is not inheritance. That is slavery disguised in ink." The line reverberated, bold enough to slice through centuries of excuses. Lawmakers sat frozen, their faces pale. Cameras shifted to capture their stunned expressions. In the gallery, applause broke out, quiet at first, then louder, rippling like a wave through the hall, until the sound became impossible to contain. It was not the cheer of partisanship, but the raw cry of conscience. Her final words carried the message beyond the walls of Congress. "The truth, when revealed, does not only free the victim," she said, each syllable echoing. "It warns the nation. It reminds us all of what must never be repeated." As she closed the binder in front of her, the sound rang like a gavel. The audience erupted, this time in applause that drowned the ticking clock, applause that rolled like thunder from the gallery to the floor, to the millions watching live. The cameras captured it all. Jasmine standing firm, Barron slumped in his seat, the giant screen blazing with the words, "Activation pending." Within hours, the video of the hearing broke every record. Tens of millions clicked watch before the night was over. By dawn, the footage had become a symbol passed from phone to phone, appearing on television screens across the world. Commentators dubbed it the chain speech, and hashtags surged across social media. "A dynasty built on blood and debt is nothing more than chains" became a rallying cry, painted on signs at protests, repeated in classrooms, whispered in kitchens. Even those who had never cared for politics found themselves sharing the clip, unable to forget the steel in Jasmine's voice. News anchors declared it the turning point of the decade. Editorials poured out. "This was not just testimony," wrote one columnist. "This was moral judgment, the moment truth ripped the mask from power." Late-night comedians repeated the line, but without laughter, it was too heavy for jokes. Instead, audiences sat in silence, nodding, the words sinking into the marrow of the national conversation. The video was no longer just evidence. It had become scripture in a country starved for clarity. Older viewers felt it most of all. In living rooms across America, men and women who had raised families through recessions, wars, and political storms sat staring at their screens. Some wiped their eyes, others clenched their fists. Call-in radio shows filled with trembling voices. I am 70 years old, and I never thought I would see a father turn his child into collateral. Another caller said, I raised 3 sons and none of them ever carried my debt. They carried my love. The clip of Barron crying out, I am a hostage, replayed alongside Jasmine's line about chains, and together they broke through layers of cynicism hardened over decades. Internationally, the image of Barron, tears streaking down his face, his voice cracking in front of the world, traveled faster than any policy debate ever had. In London, The Guardian ran the headline, The Hostage Prince. In Tokyo, broadcasters played Jasmine's words with Japanese subtitles, calling it a warning to every family blinded by ambition. Across Europe, commentators described it as the American tragedy that spoke to universal truths. The photo of Jasmine standing against the countdown clock became iconic, printed on posters shared in classrooms, etched into memory. By the time the sun rose the next morning, the chain speech was carved into the nation's memory. Jasmine's words had escaped the confines of marble walls and echoed into living rooms, schools, and town halls. They had touched the hearts of the elderly, rattled the complacency of the powerful, and comforted the frightened. More than a hearing, more than a scandal, it had become a parable for America. And the lesson was searingly clear: honor, family, and truth are worth more than every check ever signed. Thank you for watching until this moment and for standing with us on this journey for justice. Your support means everything. Like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss what's next. And we'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and let us know what moved you most in this story. Together, our voices make a difference.